Hi everyone, good morning.
Good morning, all. Just gonna wait for one more minute or so. Make sure everybody has a chance to join, and then we'll get started. I'm really excited for today.
Haha. Buried in snow, Rhode Island.
It's I'm in Massachusetts, so not too far away, but I know you guys got hit, Rhode Island, even harder than we did. I hope you're doing okay. Well, that's the one good thing about, well, there's other good things about virtual events, but one particularly good thing is you do not have to dig out your car. All right, we're getting on a little past 10, I guess. So now's a good time for us to get started. I made slides basically just to welcome everybody, but welcome. Um, Good morning, everybody. I'm really excited to welcome you all to the WordPress Editor, Designing for Higher Ed Success. My name is Pilot Irwin. I'm a WP Campus community member, a board member, and the director of events. We're really excited to have everyone join us for 2.5 hours of insightful, informative conversations and education on how we can customize the WordPress editor in a way that makes a little more sense for higher education. While I have you all here, I also want to take this opportunity to announce our next summit, which will be WordPress in Education, what we teach when we teach WordPress. It'll center on student-facing programs and how WordPress can act not just as a publishing tool, but as part of students' digital learning. This free virtual event will feature representatives from the WordPress education team, and it'll take place on Tuesday, March 24th at 10 a.m. Eastern. More details will be coming soon in the newsletter, on the website, LinkedIn, but registration is open and we'll be putting the link in the chat now. I hope you all will join us. I also want to highlight that WP Campus is a nonprofit, 100% volunteer organization. We're able to provide events like this one today because of the dedication of individuals who are donating their time, their energy, and their skills in support of our mission and building our community. So thank you to everyone for taking the time to join us, especially our guest presenters who are volunteering their time and expertise to share with you. Today's webinar is being recorded and it'll be posted on our website. After today's agenda, we will close out the event with a WP Campus after hours session from 12:30 to 1 p.m. Eastern Time, which will be for any attendees who want to stick around and participate in an open discussion about everything we've seen here today and a WordPress trivia game that will be hosted by Taylor Jayton. I will now hand things over to Ed Beck, Joeleen Kennedy, and Alexis Villegas. Happy learning, everybody.
Morning, everybody, and welcome. I'm Ed Beck. I am WP Campus's president for now. I'm just starting my second year, and I'm really excited to welcome you into this online summit. And we're going to kick off today's event with a panel-style discussion, and I am joined with Joeleen Kennedy and Alexi Villegas. We're going to be talking about the full site editor, focusing on the decisions behind patterns, custom blocks, governance, and we're going to be thinking about why successful full site editing projects start by designing the editor experience and curating what our authors are able to do. And for that, what they should be able to change and how flexibility can be supported safely. I'll be moderating this discussion. We're going to do it discussion style. Um, we've prepared some questions, but I'm also going to keep an eye on the chat. So if you are getting questions as you're going on, I will be monitoring that. I'll be seeing if that's something I'm going to ask already later. I might not slip it in exactly at that moment, but I'll make a note of it so that we can make this as responsive as we can. I'm going to first introduce Alexi and Joeleen. So Joeleen is a senior web engineer working with HumanMade, and she serves as the technical and team lead for large and complex WordPress projects. What she says she enjoys about the new technologies is that they're built on proven web foundations, and she wants to bring beauty to each project that she touches. So her goal is to make it beautiful, but usable and accessible. Alexi Villegas is a web engineer based in Puerto Rico, and he's been working in WordPress for over 10 years. Specialties include web performance, accessibility, user experience, creating fast, scalable, maintainable solutions, and working with those publishers, not-for-profit startups, small businesses. And he brings a background of zoology and geography, and that systems oriented mindset to the work, balancing his technical skills and that technical foundations with the design and usability. So we've got a set of questions prepared for them, but first I'm going to invite our panelists to just introduce themselves, say a little bit more. I always want to hear when we have people that work in WordPress, like, what has your WordPress journey been like? How did you get, from the beginning to hosting this webinar right now with me?
Think we're both waiting to figure out who goes first. So I'll jump in. I started using WordPress, I think in 2008. I was working for Elon University, and we were looking for solutions for student organizations and um, staff sites, sites that could be used in classrooms for teaching, things like that. And so we actually started out with multi-site, I think, when it was brand new, and it was great, like it was bumpy because it was brand new, but also we didn't have to have hundreds of separate individual installs. So um, from there got into agency life, and it's been a while.
Now, mine is it's been a little unusual. As Ed said, my background has nothing to do with computers. I actually wanted to be a bat biologist when I grew up. So I still love bats, but it's not something that I pursue professionally anymore. But the way I got into it is that I realized towards the end of my university that I probably didn't want to go to grad school, didn't want to pursue academia. And so I started looking at ways that I could just make money on a computer. And I don't know if you'll remember the SEO manipulation time, 2005 and 2008. There was a lot of affiliate sites and thin affiliate sites where people were like putting their links, affiliate links. So I got into it because I wanted to build a site like that to make money, and quickly realized that it is super sketchy and not really the type of thing I want to be a part of. And so, but what I did fell in love with was building the site itself. And that's when I discovered WordPress right around 2008 as well. And I never looked back. Once that door opened, I just kept doing it, freelance for a little bit, and then got into agency work. And this is where I'm at today.
I love the chat for events like this. Apparently, there's a larger overlap of bat enthusiasts and WordPress higher ed experts. That Venn diagram crosses over more than I thought it would, because you're getting a lot of
Nice.
love in the chat right now. Um, as we keep moving on, let's talk about full site editing. It's a controversial one in the WordPress community, but that's where we are. We're going to start with, when you start a full site editor project, what are you thinking about? What is the first thing that you're doing?
Well, full site editing, it's a complete paradigm shift from what we're used to in terms of, legacy WordPress from its inception all the way up until we got the block editor. And full site editing is sort of like the next step once after the block editor. You have to think of the project, you have to approach it from a design systems mentality. Like you're not just creating a bunch of templates, some widget areas, and then adding content into them anymore. Now we have to think about the user experience because the block editor, alongside with full site editing, has become similar to a page builder. And sometimes the options can be very overwhelming. The learning curve can be really steep. And so one of the things that I like to think about is who's going to be using this site? How experienced are they with it? How much hand holding do they need? Like, are they a power user that wants to have a lot of options because they're very savvy? Or are they complete beginners, the type of person that doesn't want to touch anything, fear of breaking it? But I always try to do things in a way that they won't break it, and if they do, you can always reset back to the beginning. But it is a lot of user experience thinking, design systems thinking, and you have to make a lot of decisions around that before you decide how we're going to build this thing.
Joeleen, anything you want to add in there?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that's it's all about making the experience intuitive. So you want to kind of create good pathways that are easy to use. You know, page builders have been around for a while. Like clearly there was a need there. I'm glad to see that it's moved into core. I think that what is offered in the block editor is so much more kind of streamlined, and we have so many more options for how we can control what abilities we're giving to our users. And I think that's just like it's really great. And like Alexi was saying, I like to get in there and think about, how many users are going to touch the editor? Is it like 5 power users? Or is it hundreds of people who have never touched WordPress before? And the way that we shape a site and the editor experience is very different depending on the answer to that question.
Yeah, what I almost hear when you start talking about that is you're creating, what are you're working at an agency, so what are my power users at the institution going to be able to do? And then what are like all the rest of them? So you're already thinking about those different roles and those different contexts as you push it out. This is really important, to me and to I think the WP Campus community, because I've been in sessions where we've been talking about full site editing or skirting around the issue of full site editing, and people I've literally seen the question go in the chat that says, "Can someone explain to me what the benefits of the full site editor would be?" Like honestly, like why would I make that choice? And let's try to answer that question a little bit directly right now and say, what are some of the affordances of adopting that full site editing workflow?
So I think that like the easy answer, low-hanging fruit there is just being able to edit your header and your footer. I don't know how many times we've been asked to, as engineers, change the text in the footer. And why can we not expose that so that people can change that themselves? So I think that's kind of the low-hanging fruit. Of course, you have to have guidelines about who is actually allowed to change those things. But I want to give Alexi a chance to add on to that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the obvious one is this is the way WordPress is moving forward. So it's a good way to stay up to date and to make sure that your website will be supported in the future. But to me, as a developer, what I've seen is that creating for the block editor and FSC has opened up so many doors with possibilities. Things that were very hard to do before are a lot easier to do right now. Like Mega Menus is a good example of that. It's extremely intuitive to do it now. I mean, I wouldn't say extremely, but it's much more intuitive than the previous solutions that we dealt with in the past for things like Mega Menus. There's really no need for shortcodes. There's almost no need for custom fields. You don't have to do as many templates. So the maintenance itself, once you have that design system in place and you put some guardrails as necessary, the maintenance of your website becomes much, much easier moving forward.
Alexi's kind of plugging himself as he mentioned shortcodes. This is going to be a more general discussion right now, but I know coming up we have a half hour kind of more workshop-y kind of event where he's going to show us how do you convert your first shortcode into a customizable block with options. So I'm excited for that. Um, we are going to keep moving on in here, and I want to keep talking about, where do we start with that full site? What's the first thing we tackle in there? And I think that talking about patterns and blocks is a good place to, keep this conversation moving.
Yeah, that's a really good one. Um, I would say the very first step when we get design to code into an FSC theme is the design system. So you have to extract things like the design tokens, the space units, the typography, the different font sizes, the colors, etc. Because once we program those into theme.json, then it becomes part of the theme's design system. And anytime you go, like let's say for example, you have 8 colors that belong to your design, and you don't want to users to add any more than those 8 colors or to have those as an option. Once you put them into theme.json, then every single core block that uses color setting will only display the ones that you define in theme.json. So that's usually where we first start, like the design system. And as we do that, we start realizing things like some of the spacing might not work too well. We have to adjust it. The vertical rhythm is not as good as it should be. Maybe the options that we're providing is too many options. Maybe we should narrow it down. So we really tweak the design system first because everything built up on top of that. Once we have that, creating a pattern is a lot easier because now that you've done this, a lot of your core blocks are taken care of. The paragraph, the headings, the quotes. And if they're not taken care of, it's very easy to do so in theme.json as well, where you can even add CSS. So once we have that in place, then creating patterns becomes a lot easier because now you're putting things together that are already style. And we should always start with patterns because that's the easiest way of building something. Easiest way to scaffold an idea. And if the pattern doesn't give you the solution that you were looking for, then we start looking at other options, but we usually start with that.
So I hear you say this. It's a combination, and this is also responding to the conversation I'm seeing develop in the chat. You're both in the positive, kind of building your design system into WordPress, the WordPress core way, but also kind of in the negative, removing and pulling away some of the customization options so that you're doing both things at the same time. And it's really about this vision for the website that you started with that is what this is going to look like and what your design system is going to be.
Yeah, we have a lot of things that we tend to kind of turn off right away. And I think that that's it's always, it's always a flex because for some clients they need it, for others they don't. But a lot of things like drop shadows and border colors and border radius and being able to add like customized colors or customized spacing values, things like that. We just turn off because we have a design system and we want people to use the colors that we've selected. We want people to use the spacing patterns that we've selected. We want to use a specific border style. We don't want all of those options open up to everyone. And so it's always a balance. You go in there and you take a bunch of things away, and then sometimes you realize you do need them later. Um, but yeah, just crafting that editorial experience, trying to stay as close to core as we can, using the theme.json to manage what things are allowed, There's lots of hooks you can use to hook into that and change that on a role basis so that maybe your admin users are allowed to do more things than your author users, things like that.
Yeah, great. So that theme.json now becomes a tool that you're restricting some things and you're simplifying that block editor so that what your authors are seeing is a much more streamlined experience, but you're giving them choices there that fit within the design system that you all have already constructed and built.
Mhm.
I really like that. But when you're doing this, I think what you're really saying is you're going to do this the kind of the WordPress core way. You've adopted an approach that says that for the projects that HumanMade's taking on, you're staying pretty close to that core roadmap. And I just want to give you an opportunity to tell us why. Why is staying close to core important for you?
Yeah, we've been tracking, the developments of the core project over time. And, we have a lot of people who are actually core contributors who work for Human Made. And so, I think to us, it's just one of our core values that we really like strongly believe in. If you're going to be using WordPress on a daily basis, you should be adopting WordPress as it is. But also I think that on a more practical level, we've seen a lot of times things that we've built custom because we just had to, suddenly they come out in core a year later, or we know that something is coming out, so we choose to wait for it rather than investing that time in it, And so we like to kind of follow along and see what's coming down the road. What can we look forward to? What can we plan for instead of building ourselves, and take that mentality. I think that every project is going to have more work that you can possibly do. Every project is going to have decisions that have to be made. So if you can use something from core right now, um, and save yourself time on that custom feature, that gives you that time back to spend on something else that is a higher priority right now.
Mhm. I'm laughing myself a little bit because I think that happened to us in this community. I think I remember distinctly the chat of last summit. A lot of people that was focused on accessibility. A lot of people were talking about the ability to comment and leave comments on like post drafts, and that
We
was
were involved in that.
that was a conversation in the chat that was going on, and people were like, "Oh, I use this plugin, or I use this plugin, or this is how we built this into our workflow," and that was rolled out only for the block editor, in the last in the last release of WordPress. So
Yeah.
that type of thing does happen.
One of
Alexi,
our
anything you want
teammates contributed to that, so we're really proud of it.
to? I'm proud of you. Lexi, anything you want to add to this discussion about like what's core, what you're staying close to?
Yeah, what you brought up is a very good point that things just get here. Sometimes you have a solution that you're relying on, and now Core has it in built in. You might as well just double down on it because they're going to support it for a long time. A
Mhm.
good example that I know Joleen has built way too many accordion blocks,
It's finally in
and
core.
it's finally in Core. They had the details block before, but the details block is not very accessible once you start adding more content into it because of the way that screen readers hide content inside of it. And so a proper accordion was really something that we needed, and it's good to see that coming to core. Um, to tie this in, and also I just remember another point when you were talking about why should we switch to FSE, and it also relates to why you should stay close to core. It's performance as well. WordPress has made huge strides in performance with full site editing. One quick example is that assets for blocks are only loaded whenever the block is rendered, JavaScript or CSS. And given that everything in FSC is a block, including the header menu, the footer, then you can see the benefits of only loading things whenever that block is rendered in the front end.
Okay, so performance is also a reason that pushes you to start and think about those, full site editing projects as the beginning. But I know we don't just you at Human Made, you don't just keep things just to core. You are making decisions about when you are extending things, when you are building things custom, and that becomes an important decision point of like, what can I just make from the core blocks, or take a few core blocks and put them into a pattern, and when do I want to build a block or build something custom for my site? And I just love to hear people talk about their own decision-making process when they are going to make that custom thing.
Yeah, I like to start with core blocks when you can. So the first thing I do when I get designs is I look through and I identify like, okay, I've got an image, I've got a video, I've got a title, I've got some paragraph, I've got a button, I've got a quote, and I just kind of go through the designs and I'm like, okay, these are core blocks, these are all core blocks until you hit the one thing that's not, right? But I think that a lot of times people will look at designs and they see something and they're like, okay, well, this has to be a custom block because it's a card and all of this content here is bundled up. It's like you've got an image and you've got a paragraph and you've got a button and they all go together and they've got a colored background, but we can build that with core blocks. Let's just make a pattern, right? And so I think that it's nice to really think about what can we build with core blocks, because it gives you that chance to, like I said before, kind of save your time for later once you realize what really does need to be custom. Because I think a lot of times when we do designs, we're aspirational. We're thinking about what people might want to do. But then you get real users and like constructing pages and putting things together, and sometimes they don't use it in the ways that you expect. And so if you've done it with core blocks as a block pattern, that was hardly any time. And so if it's not working for them, that's easy to dismiss and say, okay, well, we need something different now. We've seen that we have a real need. We can define what the need is, what the desired outcome is, how to measure it. And then we get into like, let's build something custom. Like we have a definition of what we're trying to do, and we have a definition of what our desired outcome is that we can measure against.
Yeah, with me, I like to always start, like Joeleen said, with core blocks. If a pattern doesn't cut it, then what's the next best thing? It's usually a block template, which is basically a pattern that you add through code. So you could create, for example, a custom block. I call them wrapper blocks because essentially the only custom part that you're doing is the wrapper around it. And then inside of it, you just add a block template, which is basically a block pattern within code. You can do this in JavaScript, but you can also do this in PHP. Um, Sometimes we can define templates. So if it's a custom post type that does one thing, one very specific thing, then we'll do a template as well with core blocks as much as we can. And if that doesn't cut it, then that's when we start thinking of a custom block. But I would say probably over 80% of the things that we need to build for clients, we can do with core blocks.
Hmm. When we're thinking about this, I think there's a kind of an information overload for some of people who haven't like been in that full site editing experience for a long time, where you have patterns. Then you have locked patterns. Then you have synced patterns. You have templates. Alexa, you were talking to me that you sometimes build a custom block, but it's still only built of core inside there.
Mhm.
And that's a lot of like mental overload to think about like, okay, what's a template part? What's a locked pattern? How do you think about all these different constructs together and decide which one is right?
Yeah, that's a really good question. With the template part specifically, that is mostly about breaking down a big template. Um, so I guess break it as break it apart as it makes sense. Um, that decision is usually one that comes from maintainability of the code, like how are we going to maintain this thing? How easy would it be to extend if we need to? But then for yeah, like you just mentioned, anytime I need to do a custom block, I really do try to use a core block template inside of it. Anytime we do custom post type, same thing, and try to do as much as possible with that.
Mhm. Okay, could we? use a specific example? Jolene, you were talking about like every design needs a card, right?
Yeah.
Like every design seems to have that card template that you're going to use at some point. Tell me how you would build that. If I'm still wrapping my brain around this, is that a pattern? Is that a synced pattern? Like what might that look like, and what tells you that this is the right solution for that?
Yeah. So could be either, depending on the situation, but I'll dig into that a little bit. So like you say, every design has a card, usually several different types of cards. And so you'll have your kind of your basic card, with the background color and the image and a title and some text. And then usually you have a variation that has a button added, or you have like a video instead of an image, or the image is on the left and the text is on the right. Um, Sometimes there's a group of cards in a carousel. Sometimes, there's an audio player or a quote inside the card. You start building variations, right? And so I think that, if it's something where you're going to reuse it in lots of places, but with different text inside of it, then you would create an unsynced block pattern. So it just gets dropped in and it can be used as just a group of blocks wherever it's dropped in. If it's something where you're like, I have this call to action that I want to have on every single page, or maybe not every single page, maybe lots of pages, but I want them to all be the same. And if I update it once, I want it to update all over everywhere that it's used. Then that would be a synced pattern. And that way, when you change it, it does update all of the instances of it. Um, Sometimes, if it is used on every like page or post of a certain post type, say, then it could become a template part because that's something that's used within the template and not in the page contents. Um, it could also, at some point, elevate itself to a custom block if you have a need. We have had situations where, because it's a pattern and there's so many small little pieces inside of it, sometimes there's tiny pieces and the card itself is tiny. It's really hard to like click on exactly what you need. It can be confusing if you're trying to work with the alignment controls or the color controls or anything like that to make sure that you're on the right element before you start changing things. So that's where we kind of start crafting that editorial experience where, if you're building this for users who aren't power users and you just want it to be like totally streamlined, all you want them to do is like choose their image, enter their text, don't change anything. It could be a locked pattern. It could be like we've built a whole page full of stuff and the whole page template is locked, or it could be where we move into custom block land where it's something that like really is truly locked down because the block itself doesn't allow editing and they can't unlock it and it's always going to be in this pattern. But that's where I have to be convinced of the business need, because if you can build it with core blocks, what pushes you over the edge? Like what is worth investing that time into making something custom? Because as soon as you do, somebody's going to say, well, can we do the same thing but make this change? Can we do the same thing but add this thing on? And then you get like into like maintaining kind of really messy code for something that could have been built with core blocks.
Yeah, thank you. I think that helps clarify it for me. And I do want to go off script a little bit here. Just a warning to Alexi and Jolene. There's something late that we had planned to address later on, but is really the topic of the chat right now, and that's choosing between like these hybrid themes and the full site editing themes. And I know, Alexi, you've built quite a few hybrid themes, and you have some feelings about this, about what you should be doing. And I just want to give you a platform to share.
Yeah. So we built a few hybrid themes out of necessity because it was what we needed. I Long story short, I think hybrid themes should be treated as a temporary solution. And the reason is that they add tech debt. into your site. So at some point, you're going to be maintaining two very different code bases. You're going to be maintaining the legacy one, which has a lot of shortcodes, custom fields, widget areas, a lot of templates. And then you're going to be maintaining the one for modern WordPress which is more JavaScript oriented for a lot of things. And it doesn't have as many of the other things that I just mentioned. But when a hybrid theme, it's not like I'm going to focus mostly on this way of building or the other way. It's like you have to do both. And you also have to make sure that they play well together. And that's where we hit a lot of roadblocks, where a plugin or a theme is trying to do something one way, but we're trying to say, hey, if it's the block editor, don't do this. If it's the block editor, do something else. Those rules, because, and this is, I'm thinking of a specific project that we had recently. As you start building those rules, you start discovering where they crack. Like scenarios that you didn't think about. Like one good example I can think of right now is that I had rules in the theme so that whenever we were using a blog editor page, we were going to remove a lot of those assets from, they were using Elementor as well. So we had to remove Elementor assets and the theme assets and make sure that it was strictly a blog editing experience. So what I didn't know is that in the search results page, I made it way too broad, the rule. If one of those pages, blog editor pages came up in the search results, it will break the whole search results page. So it's just things like this that maybe you test a lot of things, but within the big context of, of a site that has hundreds or thousands of pages, at some point you're going to encounter another roadblock. And unfortunately, that's the nature of hybrid themes. However, I do believe that they have their place. Sometimes because of an organization's policy or protocols, maybe they just don't have the luxury of being able to move that fast, or they just don't have the budget to be able to throw everything out the window and rebuild it from scratch, which is always the ideal scenario. But not everybody is in that position, and not every organization is able to do that. So I do believe that hybrid themes have a place and should be used to slowly start moving into the block editor, but they should always be treated as a temporary solution.
Yeah, I think hybrid themes can be a really good answer to adding some kind of like modern functionality into an older theme. Um, it can be like a really good way, like you say, to transition from one to another, when we don't have, when we want to add something now, or we don't have the budget to like build a whole new theme, or, we don't want to spend the next year, like migrating our content, or, whatever the answer is. If you want to do it slowly, it can totally make sense. Um, and there's a lot of different ways that we've seen themes happen. Sometimes, you just turn on the block editor for one post type and everything else stays the way that it is. Or sometimes, like you say, you have Elementor and slow process of moving away from it. But I would agree that I would not set out to intentionally make a hybrid theme today if I wasn't already moving away from a non-block theme. And I think that the reasons why there are that there's a lot of things that you get kind of like out of the box in full site editing that even when you make a hybrid theme, even when you turn on the block editor, you still don't get. And so a lot of those like spacing controls and I don't remember exactly which ones, but like spacing controls and text sizes and font styles and borders and like a lot of those kind of like special extra block controls for like how to change like the spacing in between blocks that are inside of a group block. And I would actually really love to see a chart of which things you get like just with the block editor and which things you get with FSC, but there is a difference. And so I find that when we're working on hybrid themes, we run into this all the time where we're like, why isn't this thing working? And it's it's because it's a hybrid theme and it's just not there.
Easy to forget. Yeah.
You, Joey, you shared a story we were prepping for this. One extra thing, because we're still getting discussion in the chat about I don't want my users in that full site editing experience. And
Yeah.
you shared some advice with me when we were talking yesterday. Do you want to just repeat that?
And now I'm like, gosh,
Let me remind you,
what
it
was
was
the thing?
you gave a couple people two accounts.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, yes. Exactly. Yes. So, out of the box, your first of all, your like contributor level users don't have access to the site editor. Um, but you can manage your roles and permissions to kind of figure out who should have access to what. And do your testing to see like there's a lot of really smart decisions that are already made like out of the box. But then also we have a lot of projects where somebody on the web management team that we're working with needs to have admin access to their own site, and a lot of times they're afraid. They're like, I don't want to get in there and break it. I know enough to know that I can be dangerous and I don't want the admin powers. And so what we'll do in that situation is we'll give the same user two different accounts. Like you can give them an admin account and an editor account. Say like log in as an editor anytime you're not doing anything that requires the admin powers. Like that is always an option. Another plugin that we like too is User Switcher, and this is built into Publish Press also if you're using Publish Press, but there's a separate plugin, really lightweight, just called User Switching, I think, that one of our developers Human Made actually developed. But it's great. It's really lightweight, and it just allows you to switch between accounts, which is really nice. So that if you want to test out what your site would be like for one of your other user roles
Mhm.
without having
I
to log out.
working in education and getting reports from faculty and staff and students all the time. I have that user switching plugin on every single one of my multi-sites. So I'm like, wait, I just want to see this site exactly the way you see it. So when I answer this, I have the screenshots right and everything right. I use that all the time. Um, let's circle back because what we're really talking about now is, we're thinking about governance, right? We wouldn't have a WP Campus event if we didn't spend some time talking about governance. And so, how do you think about that governance inside of this paradigm?
It really depends on what you need to do, what your users are going to do, as we mentioned before. Because we do have some options within the block editor. Like Jolene said, we can make sure that different user roles have different access to different access to different areas of the site. There's also ways of locking down templates and any pattern or template that you introduce through the theme as well. It's something that you can edit as a user. I don't know if you guys have seen whenever you go edit a pattern, you see a little lock, and the only option is to copy it and use it as a starting point. That's another fail-safe that we implement. In case a user goes in there and makes a mistake, they can always reset it back to the state that we deliver it in.
Mhm.
So there's things you can do like that are sort of built in. There's just part of core. Um, but then there's other more advanced things like VAP has a really good plugin for governance that really goes into the nitty-gritty with things like I want, like as an example, you could say something like users of this role can only see the margin control in the group block and nothing else. So you could get really precise with the type of settings and the type of blocks that specific users have access to.
Now, yeah, in theory, I could use one of these governance plugins on my multi-site, and I could remove the site editor for super or for admins, right? And make it so only my network super admins had access to the site editor, and but that so that that department secretary that's an admin on their department's, subsite, right, doesn't need the full site editor. They just inherit all the settings that I've done. That is something that could be done with these types of governance plugins, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
It's a
And something,
permission capability. And so even though we're thinking about this like in a multi-site system where many of our higher ed sites are on multi-site, even if they're admins on the site, we can remove the permissions and keep that full site editing experience just to the 5 people on the design team. I know some people are teams of one, and me saying 5 people is triggering just to the people I want on the design team.
Another thing that we do a lot is we will like you could have a whole post type where you can set anytime you create a new post in this post type, the post is pre-populated with a locked template of patterns. And so it just goes ahead and populates it. You know, you're like for articles, you always want to have an article. You always want to have a group block following your, you know, your, sorry, you always want to have article header, you know, like whatever your article header is should always be there. You always want a group block after it to put your other content inside of. And so we'll lock those containers so that they're always there and no one can take them away. No one can change it. No one can add stuff before it or do anything weird, you know. And I will point out that the locking functionality in WordPress, like by default, certain user roles can unlock it,
Mhm.
which can be nice if that's your flow. If you're just trying to help like save admins from themselves, they know as an admin user, hopefully, that if they're unlocking something, that they're doing it on purpose. But you can use hooks to make it so that you can't unlock those locked blocks also. And
Mhm.
so we'll do that a lot where we'll have kind of everything all set up. And then there's like an area inside of that locked template that's free where they can add and remove and change and reorganize blocks
Mhm.
because that's where your paragraphs and your images and whatever go. And you need that part to be unlocked.
Mhm.
Um, I saw this question in the chat just now about menus. Somebody said that they can't give their users access to FSE because that's you have to go into the site editor to update the menus, and that is very true. So if you do need that, there's a hybrid option, right? Talking about hybrid themes, but you could use the same menus and the same admin menu page that we've been using all the way up to this point, and then create the menu. So the output of that menu, you can put it inside of a wrapper block. So I've done something where I created a header block that essentially had the menu from like the legacy menu, and it just outputted that in the front end. But for all intents and purposes within the page, it behaved like a block. I was able to move it around the page, etc., and the template files. So there's options. So if we are presented with something like that, where they need to allow users that are not admins to have access to the menu, for example, then I will build it like that. I would just the same legacy menu and try to build it inside of it. If there's no better option. So it there's always an option. So if FSC does not allow you to do something, you can that's a good decision for making a custom block.
You
Mhm.
That's
could
it.
use a synced reusable block too as your to hold your menu and then use that synced pattern inside of your template part so that you can go and update it in the patterns.
Yeah, I think we're
That's
hitting
another
on our
good one.
next theme here is we want to take away permissions. We want to simplify, we want to streamline the experience, but there is such a thing as going too far. And if you remove too much, then you're just going to start frustrating your users. So, I love to hear from people that have been working in this way for a long time, that have made this decision, and now you can help us out. What have you learned? Like, I asked in our planning session the other day, I was like, what was like one permission that you like took away because you said, oh, they're not going to need that. Then you're like, you know what? They need that, and you had to reverse that. I think for me it would have been something like the removing the site editor access at all. Oh, but I need the menus. That's how do I limit this and simplify it, but not take away too much that they can't do the job that they need to do.
We've definitely had times where we've had to bring back things um, like the text style because they need to make it italic or something. Um, or, border styles. A lot of times we turn off border styles because the design system doesn't have any borders and nobody should be able to put borders on anything. And then eventually there's one thing that needs borders and it's easier just to turn the border styles back on than to create like a custom block style that includes borders. You always have to kind of like weigh the balance there and make those decisions. Like, if I turn this back on though, are people going to start putting borders everywhere else? But you can do it on a per block basis too, so that's nice.
Yeah, and also when we do have to give them access to controls like that, we can control the options that they have. So instead of adding any type of border, we'll limit things, or instead of adding any type of font size, like we'll limit it to specific options.
But yeah, I think it's kind of about, like we said, like I said in the very beginning, is it's creating those happy paths where you're thinking about like, what do I actually want people to be allowed to do, and how do I make that easy for them? I don't want my editors spending, 20 minutes looking at all of the options and trying to figure out which one is the right one for the thing that they're trying to do, and then ending up with extra options that they didn't want, that they forgot to remove, and then it looks weird and they can't figure out why. Or, they've put like a green text on a purple background, or, any of those kinds of things. I don't want them to be in a situation where that is capable and they get confused and they don't know how to fix it. I want them to be able to like very easily just get to the point that they're supposed to get to, like have the options presented to them in a way that they like, maybe ideally click one button and it automatically like has the right colors and borders and like all the things that it's supposed to have.
To me, full site editing became much more intuitive with that 2025 theme. I think I was a little bit skeptical of full site editing until the 2025 theme came out, and you were able to see, like, they built group variations. And so every, column or group object, you could click one button and it would change the background color and the text color and the header colors, all fitting kind of a design pattern. And you're saying, okay, I finally see where this is going now. Right? I can see where this path we've been on for a long time. I can see where this is starting to become more usable for me and for people who want to just make simple one-click choices. I think that's something that is a little bit hard for people that have been on this path for a long time. Is that the Gutenberg project, when it rolled out, there were reasons to avoid it, and a lot of us did. And then when you start to dip your toe back in the water, it can feel overwhelming about how much has changed over time. And there's somebody, asking in the chat comments like, "Okay, I've been avoiding this full site editing world for a long time. How do I start? Where do I dip my toe in the water? Because it all just seems so much." What advice would you have for somebody that has been building themes and is not new to WordPress? They're not new to web development, but they haven't been in this full site editing mindset.
I
Yeah,
think somebody,
go
oh no, go
ahead.
ahead. I
I
was
was
gonna
just
say,
going to say, I was just going to say, start small. I think hybrid themes are really a great way to start if you're in that situation. You've already got a site, like turn on one thing, but go for it.
I was gonna mention, I think somebody added it to the chat, but fullsiteediting.com is a really good site created by one of the contributors to WordPress, Carolina. And it is very good. It's what I got started with. So if you're a developer, especially, that's a very good resource to begin. And like Joeleen said, start small. Don't try to maybe build a whole full site editing. Maybe get a good full site editing theme, even 2025, and start playing with it. See how it works. Start changing files. See what happens. And that's how you see it. But that resource I just mentioned, it's very good because it'll break everything down in a way that is very organized.
Any final questions or final thoughts people want to put in the chat? I want to thank you for spending the time with us to talk to us about why you take the approach that you do, sharing the things you've learned along the way. I find it intensely valuable to hear from someone that has made the mistakes, has fixed it, and is still like convinced that they're on the right path. And so it's not our job to convince the community to adopt full site editing. We get no kickbacks from big WordPress for, putting the full site editor like in an event or talking about it. But it's something that we can think about as like this is a real choice that we can think about. So I just I'm seeing the chat and I hope that there are things that people have taken from this. We are going to take just a few minute break. It's not on the schedule, but we're going to give Alexi just a few minutes to catch his breath, maybe grab a drink of water before he dives in at 11 o'clock with the demo of how he's going to convert a shortcode into a editable block resource that has its own settings menu and things like that. So I want to just thank our panelists. Any final thoughts before we sign off for a few minutes? Okay, everyone, thank you for
No.
being here. Update. I was about to say, update that cup of coffee you've got. Warm up that cup of coffee that you've got. Use the bathroom if you need to. We'll be back here at 11. All right, everybody. I hope that 5 minute break was good for you. I hope it doesn't get you too sucked into your other work email and now you're doing other things and you can still connect with us. I'm gonna uh, ask Alexi to rejoin me. And one of the things that we're looking at is moving shortcodes to blocks. And we're looking at that as a small incremental change that anybody could do, whether they're using a classic theme, a hybrid theme, a full site editing theme. It's a low risk way to begin using the block editor and developing in the block editor a little bit more. And so he'll be showing off how to use that familiar PHP functionality and bring it into the kind of modern WordPress editing experience, reducing our reliance on things like shortcodes and bringing us a little bit closer to core. So this session will focus on that, small change. What's one thing that we can do, keeping what already works, improving the editor usability experience, and setting the stage for next level things and next step things for people who are interested in doing that. So this talk is mostly aimed at developers and technical teams, but if you don't find yourself as part of that group or that doesn't describe you, it's only for half an hour, so stick around, stick with us. But we're going to be thinking about how to move towards that block editor at your own pace, in environments where stability, governance, and the our long-term maintainability really matters. So, Alexi, thank you for being willing to not only come and be part of that big picture talk, but also kind of narrow in and say like let's show something off in detail. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I'm going to share in the chat a repo that I put together. If anybody wants to follow or use it as a reference later, I hope you do. The repo, it's built, it's as a plugin, and it's built in a way that you should be able to use it as a foundation for a plugin that you might create in the future. If anybody needs this later on, please let me know. I'll be happy to share as well. So the idea of, can everybody see my screen here in the repo page?
Looking good.
All right, thank you. So the idea of this is to, like Ed said, I want to illustrate an easy way because a lot of the times organizations are not fully ready to move on into full site editing, and they shouldn't have to do it like that, right? The only way to migrate into block editor or full site editing should not just be all or nothing. So one thing that we discover as we work with a lot of clients is that sometimes the slow approach is the best approach. And one of the lowest hanging fruit when moving from a classic theme into something more modern, it's to convert shortcodes into blocks. And there's a pretty straightforward way of doing this with what WordPress calls dynamic blocks or also server-side render blocks. These blocks, if anybody has worked with advanced custom fields blocks before, it's similar because they're doing something behind the scenes that's almost identical to what core does. So I put the repo together as a reference, but I am going to show you what the user experience looks like before and after. I'm also going to show you some of the code, but I'm not going to bore you too much with that. If you really want to dig in or have any questions, please let me know at the end. But the repo will be hopefully something that you could use moving forward with that. I do go over the project structure, try to explain what each one of these files does. And I did add a script called create block. So there's some commands here that you could use. Once you get started, you clone it just into the plugin file. You install the dependencies, and then you'll have a block. There's a command called npm run create block, and then you pass the name of the block that you want to create, and it'll create this structure right here for you. So each one of these files, just very quickly, because we are going to talk about this. Block.json is where you're going to define your metadata, your attributes, the location of the files that are relevant to the block, like the render one, the view.js, the style sheets, etc. The edit controls basically the editor screen, what happens in the editor screen. On a JavaScript block, you also have the save.js file. In this case, we're not using it because we're not doing a JavaScript block, we're doing a server-side render block. Another file that's very important is the render.php. This file, it's basically the PHP logic that runs in the server before it returns the output in the editor. So I'll show you what that looks like. But the process, a very quick process of what this is like is that you start by creating the basic structure of a block. In this case, we run the script that'll give us the file structure that I just talked about. Then you determine what all the attributes in the shortcode that you're going to be using, because these attributes is what's going to turn into the different controls. So we're going to create a UI for managing these different attributes for the shortcode. Then you register these attributes in block.json. Like I said, each one of them is going to be directly tied to the shortcode attributes. Then we create a UI. We update the JS function, the edit.js with server-side render. This is a component that WordPress core provides for creating. There's a bunch of different components. This is one of them that allows you to see what that rendering of the block looks like, and you can use it in the editor. So there's also eliminates that need to be switching back and forth to see what this looks like, even though it is a shortcode. And then finally, in the render.php file, it's pretty straightforward. We just use do shortcode, which is a way of running a shortcode programmatically. The way this looks like, if we go, this is a demo site that I put together real quick. And if we look at the shortcode that I have, this is what you expect from a lot of these. This one is called faculty card, talking about cards. This is another one. And then you pass different parameters. In this case, we have the name, we have the title for the faculty, we have their email and phone number, and then an ID of the image. And this is what that looks like. As you can see, we have an image, we have the name of the person, we have the title, the email, and the phone number. Pretty straightforward. However, the editing experience is not the best, right? You have a shortcode here. You don't really know what this looks like. And let's face it, shortcode is still writing code. So if you're a user and you don't like writing code, yeah, this is the type of thing that gives you stress. This is not going to be your favorite way of editing things. So even though we have a shortcode block that we could just add the block and throw the shortcode inside of it, and everything will work as expected, you're really leaving a lot in the table in terms of the user experience and the flexibility that we could provide if we turn this into a block. So now I'm going to show you what it looks like afterwards, and then I'm going to walk a little bit more with details on how we can accomplish this. If we go down here to the widget section, we can see that there's a faculty card block. Right away, you see a preview for it with a placeholder image and some content. And as you can see, it's starting to take shape. On the right-hand side, you can see that I added some controls for each one of the attributes that we're going to be passing. So if we click here, we have one for image, so we can pick the image. We have the name, the faculty title, email, and phone number. So I'm just going to add these right here just to match the design so you can see what it looks like. And like I say, if anybody's familiar with ACF blocks, you already understand how this works. Email, and then finally phone number. Now, another thing that makes this shortcode in specifically is that the image is really hard to get, right? If you want to add an image, you have to go to the media library and look at the URL and pull that ID number to then pass it into the shortcode. So it's just not very intuitive either. So for that, I added a component that lets you choose an image. Let's just pick this one. Why not? And as you can see, as we'll show you in the front end now, this looks exactly. In fact, let me just pick the same image. As you can see here, we have exactly the same thing, the same output. And this is because we're using the same PHP render function for the shortcode to render this in the front end. But one of the benefits of having this as a block is not just the user experience, that you get access to a lot of things that are built into blocks already when working with core. So one thing is that we can add support for styles. In this case, I added a different style for vertical card that changes the layout. We also added some controls for text color. So we want to change the text color. We can just click here and assign that. We can do the same thing for background color. We want something like that. And also link color. So I don't know if you want to maybe green. And then the hover, you want it to be blue. That is not very accessible. So just keep that in mind. This is not something that we would want to do. You can also reset it here, go back to what it was before. And in fact, core even gives me a warning that this is not a good color combination. We also added controls for margin. So top, bottom margin, and right, left margin. In this case, it's not really going to make much of a difference because of the width that we're working with. Just add a sensible margin there. And as you can see, when we were talking about providing different options for users, in this particular theme, there's only so many options for margin. So the benefit of having something like this is that when you go to theme.json and you say the design system can only have these different space values, 1 through 7, and they are going to scale proportionally, you can program that in here, and this is what it will look like when you pick a different value. We also added the ability to change the border color and the radius. So if you want to go here and make this purple, maybe 2x, we can do so. Same thing with the radius. The default one is about 8px, but if I want to make that 15, we can do that as well. As you can see, now we're getting functionality that wasn't there before. We also added alignment controls. Everything that I'm adding here, it's built into core. None of this was custom. The only thing that was custom is the component for within the settings panel here for choosing the image. But that is a component that you can take from the repo and use it in all your projects as well. So the alignments here, if we want to make it white, we could do that. We want to make it full width, we could do that as well. And like I said, we also have the vertical card that gives you a different layout. So the question is, how do we do this? So let me show you now in the code. And please do let me know if this is too small. I'll try to make it bigger. But do let me know if this is hard to read. I don't want to bore you too much with the full structure of this. There seems like there's a lot of files, but a lot of these are configuration files for the linter. The repo comes with linter for JavaScript and PHP, so you can follow the WordPress coding standards. And a lot of these are just configuration files. The most important thing in this case is the blocks file. The blocks file is where we register the blocks. So the way we're doing this, we are introducing or registering the blocks through WP scripts. And WP script is a package from WordPress core that was built for block development. So what it does is that it looks for the block.json file within all of your folders. And once it finds it, it builds a copy, in this case, the build folder. So we go from source, this is where we keep the files, and then the build folder is where the build file is going to. The reason why it's grayed out is because we are not committing those files to the repo. This is something that gets built when you go into production. So as you can see here, this is basically the block files and some editor settings that we created. So if we go into the first step, like I mentioned before, I can't see with this thing here, so let me close that. Here we go. So the first thing you want to do, if we go into blocks here under source, we can see that we have one called faculty card. Like I said, block.json is where you're going to define things like the name, the icon that we're going to be using, description. But this part right here supports. This is the part that allows us to add the alignment for wide and full width, the colors, the color options, the spacing for margin specifically. We're not doing block gap and we're not doing padding. And also border, which as of right now, is still in some WordPress versions is still experimental. At some point, this is just going to become border. But what this means usually when you see these experimental prefixes, usually means that it's something that is not fully integrated yet. So use with caution whenever something says experimental, because it might be removed or it might just change implementation steps. And you're going to have to go back and update that. The other things that we do in here is that we define the different attributes. In this case, the name, the title, the email, the phone. And then for the image, we are defining two extra, the image ID, but then we're also defining image source and image alt. That's because this is necessary for rendering that image in the editor, but we're not passing that into the shortcode because we don't need it. And this is finally the example. This is how you build the preview here. If you go insert this, and you hover on it, that preview that you see on the right-hand side, that's controlled by this example. Essentially, you just pass an example object and then an attribute object with all of the different values that you want the example to have. And then in here as well, you tell WordPress that the index file is the main file. You have a JavaScript file. In this case is a CSS file, I'm sorry, style.scss. The style.scss gets converted into style-index for the front end and then index for the back end for the editor. So this is why, even though this is called editor and this one's called style, when you go into the build script, you'll see that they're called something different. We have index and then we have style-index. So that's why we're referencing them like this. On the edit screen, what we're doing again is we're passing the different attributes that we had on the editor page. And then everything here under inspector controls, this is basically your sidebar controls. So if we go here, the inspector controls, we have a control for the image, name, title, text, etc. So anytime you see the inspector controls component, that is the one that controls the different settings in the sidebar. So you have the panel body, and then you have the panel role for each one of the settings. So I like to have a panel role for each setting. This is so that it inherits the default styles from WordPress core, and it looks like it was built by WordPress. But you don't need to add this panel role. This is optional. So we have just text controls. These are some of the different components that WordPress provides out of the box, and we're adding them here from this WordPress components package. I have some links in the repo for references where you can find a lot of these as well. But basically, it's the block editor handbook. It's a very good source. Anything after inspector controls, as I commented here, it's going to be what gets displayed in here in the editor itself, in the editor page. So in this case, because this is a server render block, what I'm doing is that I'm passing the server-side render component with the name of the block. This is the programmatic name of the block, and then the attributes. And what this is doing is that it's going to render the block and then display right here in the front end. So if I make any changes here, you'll see it right away. and that's just rendering in the server and then displaying it here very quickly. These are your editor styles, editor only styles. This is the file that puts it all together. We don't usually edit this one. The style.scss is the styles for the front end and the back end. So editor.scss is specifically for the back end. Style is for both. So I got things here like the settings sidebar. I wanted to style some fields, so I did that, but I don't need that CSS in the front end. And then where the magic happens is in the render.php file. And what we're doing here is I'm actually checking if we are in the editor or if we are in the front end. And the reason for this is that if I were to pass these wrapper attributes here is what adds the class for the block. If I were to pass this wrapper, it gets added twice, because if you remember on the edit screen here, I'm also passing the block props or the attributes as a wrapper around the server render block. So I don't want to return that wrapper again. So that's why I'm separating things. Either just echo the shortcode if we're in the editor, or echo it with the proper wrapper diff if we are not. And all we're doing really is that whenever you have render.php, it immediately gets these three attributes passed into it. And the attributes array has every single one of the attributes that were edited in the editor. And this is how we catch them. So they are a direct replacement to the attributes in the shortcode. So as you can see here, all I'm doing is do shortcode, and then I'm typing the shortcode, but I'm breaking it every time I need to echo something in here. So I got the name, I got the title, email, phone, and then the image ID that we pull from the editor as well. So pretty straightforward. The idea is that you don't have to do a ton, and you can also use a lot of the tools that WordPress provides out of the box, like the supports for block.json.
Hey, Alexi, I think you
Alexia.
accidentally muted yourself.
Sorry about
Well,
that.
well, Lexi's finding his mute button. I am watching the chat. If you've got any questions, just keep putting them in there, and I can pass those along.
Yep. Yeah, so what I was saying is that a lot of these things like the support, this is built into WordPress. So you can do a lot with very little. You can keep the same logic, you can keep the same markup for your block, but you can enhance it by adding essentially a custom wrapper around it. And once you do that, you get access to styles, you have access to block variations, and you also have access to all the different support parameters that WordPress provides out of the box, like color, spacing, and border, etc. There's others that you can add, but it just didn't make a lot of sense for this block, so I didn't do that. And if you want to see how quickly we can create a new block, if we want to make a new one, we could just go in here. And I want to
Alexi,
city
that is a
into,
little small. Could you make that a little bigger?
yes, I can. I don't know how to make that here. But sorry about that. So we're gonna city into WP content. All right, so in here we can say npm run create block, and we'll call this one my shortcode block. This is gonna think a little bit, and it's gonna grab some templates files that we define here on the bin folder. And if we go to source blocks, you can see that now we have the my shortcodes block with all of the different files that you need. Even view CSS is in here. This is a proper block already. So if we run npm run build, this is going to package everything together, and it's going to add it into the build folder here, you can see my shortcode block is here as well. Now, if we go refresh this page and go back to the widget section again, that's where we're adding all of them. You can see my shortcode block here. And it's just, like a placeholder in the back end, same thing in the front end. The idea is that you'll have all of the files that you need with a working block already, so you can start experimenting and do the same thing. You can also have within this plugin more than one block. So if you want to create a block library, for example, this is something that you can do as well. Right now, it's set to only do a server-side render block. But if you want to make a JavaScript block, you have to add, just make some changes, like add a save.js file and update the index.js. But that's optional. I didn't want to go into too many details since we wanted to focus this on the shortcodes alone. But anybody have any questions? I'll be happy to answer them now.
Ben Toby in the chat says, we have a similar personnel contact card to what you've demonstrated here, but we implemented it as a pattern with bindings as opposed to a custom block. Any general thoughts on when it makes sense to use the block bindings API versus building custom blocks?
That's a really good question. That's a very new API. I would say that a block pattern for this is always better. When it makes sense to do what I just did is that if you have a lot of shortcodes that are being used in hundreds of pages, and it really doesn't make a lot of sense to go into each one of them and replace all those instances, then maybe this approach will be a lot quicker or get you there closer. But I would absolutely prefer what you did with the pattern and the block bindings. I don't have a lot of experience with block bindings. I do know what it does, but I haven't implemented them myself yet. It's still quite new. But I would say, let me double check. You said the question was, what is the difference, right? When would you would choose one or the other?
General thoughts on when it makes sense to use one or the other.
Yeah, versus the shortcode, right?
When to use the block bindings API versus building a custom block.
Yeah, a really good question. It really depends on where your data resides. If your data is external, and it makes sense to do the block bindings that way, because I know that's one of the big benefits of block bindings is that you can pull data from an external source. I would say block bindings in that scenario makes a lot of sense.
I think that also,
But
sorry, just
yeah,
jump in quickly. It could also make a lot of sense if you're wanting to use, metadata. So say you're storing something as post meta that you want to pull in, like in your query loop somewhere else or something like that. That can be a good way to access that post meta.
yeah. But I think you're on the right track with experimenting with patterns and block bindings. I will say always start with that if possible, for sure.
I was wondering, Alexi, if you have particular resources you would recommend for people who want to learn more about this.
Yeah, so
You
in the repo over here, I do have some useful links. I also wanted to share this other repo. Let me just throw it in here in the chat. And then maybe we can send these if
let
possible to the
me,
user.
yes, Alexi, let me see if I can give you permission to send that to everyone. Right now, there's a little bit of an in-between where
Oh,
I'm
got you.
forwarding things.
All
All
right.
right, I've toggled that. Can you try sending it again?
Yes, absolutely.
Elaine is
So
also saying that this type of block would be pretty straightforward to create as something fully custom. I think that
yes,
where you have to click into each piece to edit rather than having separate inspector panel sidebar fields. Um,
I go ahead.
I was just going to say, do you have thoughts on building new things from scratch versus I think one of the reasons we were talking about shortcodes is for people who have maybe legacy custom
Yeah,
shortcodes on their site.
exactly. This particular pattern right here, the way I would do this if I was starting from scratch is to build a pattern. Um, where you can click on it and edit things like this. This right here will be a heading. We style it differently, but it could probably be an H2. This could be an H3 or a paragraph. the email and the phone, just 2 paragraphs, and then a link for the email and a link for the phone number. And then do a row block. This will be a group block that uses the horizontal row variation. And then add this to the left, and then add a gap that matches this. So it could be done with core with just patterns. And that will be the way I will approach it. But you're absolutely right. This is more for people that have legacy code, that have hundreds of these shortcodes maybe all over the place, and they want to slowly move into the block editor and see what's possible. They can start taking advantage of it while still retaining the same code base.
Yeah, we've also used the server-side render for new blocks in places where there's like some really kind of complex front-end rendering that we're trying to do, where we're using conditionals based on, different options to display different things, and of course, that maybe not be the best example because you can do that in JavaScript as well, but um, anything where it's easier to write it in PHP and you're
Exactly.
on a time crunch, like or you already have all the PHP code and you're just trying to turn it into a block instead of starting over. Yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me, I built one time. We had to do a related post block, and I knew how to do this in PHP, and I had the code from a previous project on how to do it with PHP, and we were in a time crunch. I had maybe like half a day to do this. So it made a lot of sense to just create a server-side render block, and then within the render file here, because this is all PHP, I added all of that PHP logic, and it worked great. Would it have been better as a JavaScript block? Probably, but it allowed me to do this in the time that I had, and it worked just as well. So there's always, you have to weigh things in, like do I want it perfect? Do I want it timely? It really depends on the situation, depends on the client, and depends on the project.
Thank you so much. It looks like the block editor taster might be marked as private right now.
Oh, it
We'll be
is.
saving. Yeah,
Yes,
that's
I'll change
okay.
that.
Yeah. I'm saving all of the resource links that we have and we can make them available later. So,
Yeah, that sounds
Alexi,
great.
don't worry about getting that done in the next 10 seconds. Oh God, absolutely not.
Oh,
Yeah, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. Um, you should be able to respond to the chat directly now. I think I've toggled that setting correctly. I'm still uh, a little bit getting used to Zoom um, running the webinar from the webinar side, but this has been really, really great. Thank you so much. Uh, Ed, is there anything that you want to add? I realized that I got a little too excited and maybe took over your spot, but
No, no, we're good. Thank you so much for sharing that, Lexi. We have built a couple breaks throughout the day. We want to make sure that even though we're doing kind of like a half day event, we have breaks. So we're moving into another break right now, 15 minutes, and we're going to be back at 11:45, where we're going to be talking about a panel presentation about customizing WordPress in higher ed. We're going to have three panelists who are going to share a small piece of a project in kind of quick lightning talk fashion, and then be around to answer some questions, whether from Pilot or from the audience.
yeah, that'll be really exciting. So, as Ed said, join us at 11:45 for uh, customizing the WordPress experience without losing your mind with our panelists, Ed, Kevin, and Mike. See y'all soon.
thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. It's 11:45. Our break is over, and I am so excited to continue with our event. Um, we've had some really good conversation going in the chat. Uh, Ed mentioned that we are looking for more themes for our upcoming summits. So we have a summit coming up March 24th that will be WordPress in higher education. Well, it's all WordPress in higher education, but WordPress in education, focusing on how WordPress fits into student learning experiences. But we also have the whole future ahead of us, and we want to do a lot more of these events. So if you have ideas for topics that you would like to see, we would love to hear them. We've had some good suggestions already from Andrea and from Blake in the chat. Thank you both. And I'm really looking forward to this. All right. Yeah. Oh, I'm still sharing my screen. That's what's wrong. There we go. Cool. If I could have everybody just turn the cameras on, get ready. It is time for our next session. Customizing WordPress to meet higher ed's needs without losing your mind. Now that we've explored how to make the full site editor work for you, let's shift to some examples of customization that's happening specifically in higher education. So this will be a presentation panel, sort of hybrid. And I'm really thrilled to have an amazing lineup of panelists. So we're joined today by Mike Henderson, Kevin Grimley, and Ed Beck. Let me introduce them to you. Mike Henderson is a web developer who strives to create accessible and performant websites. He's been working with WordPress since 2009, and he enjoys keeping up with the community and the evolving WordPress project. Most recently, Mike has been digging into building design systems using the block editor and block themes. When he's not behind the screen, Mike sometimes rides his bike really, really long distances. I need to ride my bike more. You're an inspiration. Kevin Grimley is a senior web developer at Butler University. He's worked in higher ed since 2018 and has 15 plus years of WordPress development experience. That's crazy. That's really cool. And Ed Beck is the open and online learning specialist at SUNY Oneonta. He works on a variety of topics, including online learning, open educational resources, and artificial intelligence. He's an advocate for embedded digital literacies across the curriculum and the co-founder of SUNY Create, an initiative to utilize open source technology to create websites. In 2021, he was honored with the Fact2 Award for instructional support. So thank you all for joining me. I got to stop saying I'm excited, but I can't stop being excited. So I'm in a little bit of a loop here. Each of our panelists has been working on really interesting customization projects, which I know a bit about, but the audience may not. So just to give them a clear picture, I'll have each of you give like a quick 5-minute lightning talk about your work before we move into the discussion. Audience members, if you have questions, please put them into the chat or into the Q&A, and I'll bring them up in our conversation once we get to that point. Mike, will you kick us off?
Sure. Thanks, Pilot. Yeah, I'm Mike Henderson. I'm a senior WordPress developer at New City. And for the past 3 years, my team has worked with the folks at University of Tennessee, Knoxville on the creation of their WordPress-based web design system. So the WDS, as we call it, consists of four parts. There's the Torch WordPress theme, and there's hosting and technical support aspects. There's a training and documentation pillar, and then their campus community network. And I could talk hours and have about this project, but today I'm just going to focus on the WordPress theme itself and how the campus community contributed to the development of this product. So the Torch WordPress theme is a block-based hybrid theme, if you will. It makes a use of the design tokens that were mentioned earlier, configured in theme JSON. It has an extensive pattern library, also the block page templates, but it also uses the aspects of the classic menu builder and some customizer settings, like to change like archive page settings or, configuring social media icons or header footer kind of situations. We developed the design system over a period of 3 years. Once we had a MVP pattern library, we created a pilot user group consisting of editors from 3 different colleges to build out their sites with the system and provide us feedback on the theme. So we set up a monthly release cycle, which allowed us to quickly iterate and incorporate this feedback from those pilot users and fine tune and adjust the functionality of the theme. And so part of that WDS toolkit, the users had access to like a documentation site. There they could explore and shop the pattern library. We like to call it storefront. And each component page has a section, and I can show this later if we want, of recommended use cases and guidelines for each component, and accessibility considerations for each one of those. It's also interesting to mention that this storefront site was built entirely with the theme that we created, and it has additional functionality that allows you to browse the library, explore those different color variations for each of those components, what widths the component officially supports, and if there's like a left-right alignment, if that's available. And that UI closely mirrors what you would see in the block toolbar in the editor, and it uses like the same icons. So it's like another way to educate people about using those WordPress tools. It also has a piece of functionality called copy block, which is inspired from the WordPress pattern library, which allows the editors where they're browsing the storefront to copy that pattern code and paste it directly into their site so they can use that exact variation. So this pilot group that I've been talking about was instrumental in transforming this product from this MVP pattern library to a fully built theme that was ready for mass adoption across the UTK campus. So UTK has a very strong network of campus communicators and web editors. Their group meets at a regular cadence, and during the WDS build out, all of our progress was shared with them, from designs to beta functionality for that group's feedback and input. So by the time these folks had access to the theme, there was like a lot of excitement and understanding because this group of users had been part of that journey the entire time, right? And a huge lessons from that project, I guess, is to build a successful design system and site, not only need to consider like the end users of the site, but the site editors as well. And I think that strategy made a big difference in the success of this project. So
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, I'm already seeing a couple of people in chat saying that they want to hear about the component storefront in particular. I have a note about that to come back to. And I'm real excited. I gotta stop saying that. I gotta put a penny in the jar for every time I say that. Kevin, how about you next?
Okay. I'm Kevin Grimley. I'm the senior web developer at Butler University. And we started looking at full site editing pretty much as soon as it rolled out. When it did first roll out, for us, it wasn't mature enough for enterprise use, at least not our needs. But that's like changed dramatically. And like I think for a while now, it really has been. So one of our big concerns is overall governance of our WordPress sites. I sit in IT along with a very small development team, like me, one other person, and our DevOps guy, who is really good. But so our primary site that we use is www.butler.edu, and that's owned by marketing. They have a lot of needs. We have a lot of editors across campus. We have a lot of auxiliary sites on top of that. And what we're kind of looking at and aiming to do is have a single theme that can kind of power everything, and then use a collection of plugins to add the functionality we need on top of that. So starting with marketing, control was needed. Like we can't have everybody have access to everything all of the time. The example I used the other day when we were talking was like the average editor does not need the query loop. And then we have other sites that need to be even more restrictive. Like this is very much the framework. I mean, almost think back to like custom, like true custom fields and a PHP template that you input the data and then it just spits it out. But we want to do all of this with full site editing. So I've got a few examples here just to give you a visual on what I'm talking about here. And so like here, we have a site where we will eventually house policies. This is an old development site, so it's not exactly what we have now, but like we will have editors to input policies, and when they come in, all they'll have access to is the Butler policies area. And when they click the button, they have a locked template sitting on the page that they just fill in the blanks. And that's what works for that. When we kind of move up away from that and we get into like our primary website and a lot of our auxiliaries, we need to be able to control what blocks people have access to. Again, go back, not everyone needs access to the query loop all the time. So we have a plugin we built that just pulls in all the blocks. Doesn't matter if it's core, if it's blocks that we wrote ourselves, or if it's a third-party plugin that we have on the site. This one doesn't have any third-party plugins that have blocks associated with it, but we have our core blocks, and then we have our custom blocks that we've written in-house. So that's been incredibly important for us, and it allows us to, at least at a high level, control what people have access to. And then to take it a step further, what we have found historically, at least for our institution, is that we can get a wonderful website from a vendor and it looks great when the on the slide deck, it looks great in the pitch, it looks great when it's handed to us, and then 2 weeks later someone over in marketing or someone somewhere in campus needs to be able to do more, or they need to be able to like, well, I need this, but I need to change the color here, and I think we've all kind of experienced that. So what we're looking at now is like, how do we restrict that at a block, not just what blocks people have access to, but what controls within those blocks do they have? So like our editors need access to everything. This is a custom pattern that I put together based off of the text media block. And as an admin on the site, I have access, I can bold the text if I need to. I can do all the things over here if I need to. But when it comes to an editor, oh, go figure. When it comes to the heading block, they might need to bold the heading or italicize the heading when it's just outside by itself. But when it's inside this particular custom pattern, we don't want them to have access to all of that. We don't want them to be able to make it, to highlight it or strike through it or things like that. So that's kind of the point that we're at now, is like bringing everything together so that we can roll this out hopefully within the next couple months. And yeah, that's just kind of where we're at with our journey.
Awesome. Thank you, Kevin. Yeah, I'm seeing a couple people in the chat talking about the ability to restrict blocks, and very good.
You have to.
Ed, do you want to bring us up?
All right, so I was building a portfolio theme for using with my students, and I was thinking about that kind of in the context of my multi-site, and then also what can I build into the theme. So I'm curating it in a couple of different places at the same time. So one of the reasons why we use a multi-site when we're dealing with students is we want to be able to customize the dashboard. We want to be able to pre-select and curate plugins for them. And we also want to be able to push templates. And I mean template not as in like the theme, as in a template within a theme, but like an overall site template. When I start with a portfolio at SUNY Oneonta, they have a pre-built template that gets copied for them that has a home page and a static page already set, that has a projects page and it's already their blog page. Just a very light template that gets them started thinking in that portfolio mindset. And we decided to switch to full site editing. And so I was already thinking about like some of the hangups. Full site editing is complex and it's not linear. And so I was already looking at other helper plugins that are in the, .org plugin directory that help with people who want to do full site editing. And I was noticing nice things like Twentig was a plugin, especially helps you utilize the features that are already built into that 2025 theme. And I liked this block that had like a deep link that said like just click here to edit the header, click here to edit the footer, and like merge those to top level so that people can do the three most commonly changed settings for a theme. They could do that without having to like wade through the full menu of the full site editor. And I was inspired by other, ed tech organizations. Me working in education, I'm very familiar with Pressbooks, and they had done a big dashboard redesign. And so I stole from Pressbooks, which is over on the left hand of my slides, where they had kind of done some UX design and said, okay, what are the six things that students need to be doing? And I kind of built that into my open lab where I say, okay, let's surface right to the top level. And I'm not restricting how to get in there and do it. It's everything that's over in the right hand side is still in that left hand menu, but I kind of have a alternative pathway to get to the area that I know that students are going to want to find. So I'm trying to like take a multi-prong approach here. But let's talk about the actual theme. The Red Dragon portfolio theme that I can share a link to GitHub if anybody wants to inspect or look at it is actually just a very light fork of the 2025 theme. We wanted a theme that felt like a Swiss Army knife. We wanted a theme that everyone could be using the same theme and using the same controls, but at the same time, it didn't mean that all of our sites had to look exactly alike. And so that was a lot of the approach that we took. And so we were really leaning into the styles and styles variations and the variations in color palettes that the 2025 theme really showed off. And for those of you that haven't like followed full site editing very closely, 2025 was the first theme that really highlighted the ability to change color palettes and typography independently. Before that, styles was kind of a ubiquitous thing. Like when you changed the style, you had to change everything about the site. 2025 was the first one where you could say like, oh, I like how the spacing is here and how the typography is here, but let me just change the color palette. So we took that and that made us edit the theme.json for the very first time. And this was a maze to me as a non-developer. But I was staying very small in what I wanted to edit. And working from the core theme actually helped me to say, I only need going to change one thing at a time. I'm going to make a new style for myself, like red afternoon or red dusk, because Oniana's brand colors are red. But I'm just going to change the colors only in that color palette. Or I'm going to start restricting what students have access to for their editing, but I'm going to do this kind of one setting at a time. And I started to do things like I removed all of the margin and padding spacing for students. I did those kind of controls just to simplify that editor experience, to be a couple less controls that they had to learn about and think about. The biggest theme from this was our pattern library that we built, where we decided we were going to build about 65 different patterns that would be used for portfolios. And we made the choice to block all of the WordPress.org patterns so that only our patterns would be there. And again, we did this by getting into the code. We built them into our theme. So like our kind of keynote presenters had talked about, these are locked in there in that they're built into the theme. An individual student can't edit these, but they can copy these. It leaves our version always for them on the site. And we also started to say, like, okay, for certain page types or post types, let's pre-fill it with some of these patterns. And we went light to start. We said, okay, let's put like three variations of what our front page could look like. Let's create a resume page because that's sometimes difficult for the students to conceptualize how to put the blocks together to make kind of a resume outlook. And so that's where we started being in and customizing our own pattern. It was light changes to an already established theme that we already knew and liked and we knew was, 99% what we wanted. Finally, the thing that we decided to do that really changed things a lot for us is we did edit the post editing experience quite a bit. Kevin had talked about like, hey, most people don't need the query loop block, right? We took a lot of the full site editing blocks out of the post experience. I didn't like how, since the students are all admins on their subsite, they were getting things like the pagination block and the comments block right inside the post editor. So we removed them with a piece of code so that those would not be in the post editor, but would still be available to them if they went into the full site editor. So they were only getting those blocks they needed in the context that they needed them in. And I thought that was a big improvement with the students who I was working with. They really enjoyed that because I had a small group of 5 students that I was kind of bouncing ideas off as we went through this process to get real feedback. And they really enjoyed when they started to see like that more slimmed down, simplified experience.
I actually got to see this, a different variation on this presentation back in November, and I'm still blown away by how much thought went into making like a really good beginner experience. Okay, we've had a couple of people responding in the chat, but no specific questions, which means that I'm in charge. Uh, and we will start with my questions once I find my tab, because I got lost. That's great. Yeah, I actually have a couple of different questions for you all. Some of which, the first one that I have on my list is maybe something that you've all addressed a little bit already, but talking about the sort of institutional problems or goals that you were looking to meet. So each of you has sort of brushed on this, but I wanted to hear sort of where this was fitting in with what you all are looking to, what the big scale is, basically.
I mean, I guess I can start. So our goal is our goal is really to enable a small development team to be able to support 30 to 35 different sites, some of which are multi-sites that range anywhere from 2 to 2,000 sites on them. Now when it comes to the ones that are like massive, like the 2001, that's really it's a website of your own kind of situation. It's not something that like we're going to put that much thought and effort into, but it's still something that we have to support and be ready to help out with. Um, when I started, we had code bases spanning, I don't know, a half a dozen, 10 different languages. Um, and that's just not maintainable for a small team. So like over the course of years, we've been refining what we do and don't support. And this is kind of like, I don't know, this is kind of the culmination of all that because we've kind of got most of our ducks in a row, but we just need to get it down so that like those final few code bases are ones that either we've written or we've put enough oversight in with a third party that, it's something that once it gets passed off to us, we can continue to maintain because we don't tend to keep ongoing relationships or ongoing contracts once a project has been finished. It's really it's a handoff. And like one of the things that this project that I kind of touched on bits and pieces on is it's given us the ability to codify our development standards. And one of the things, and I think the folks from Human Made were talking about this, is staying as close to core as possible. Like if WordPress offers it, then why aren't we taking advantage of it? We don't need to recreate the wheel because recreating the wheel, recreating the wheel just makes more problems down the road. So, yeah. So that's a very,
Um,
very high level, broad answer to your question. I'm happy to get into specifics, but
to jump on that too, Kevin, the UTK team is a very small team, but I think the scale is potentially quite large. Like this system is rolling out to like hundreds of college websites. several multi-sites or multiple multi-sites. I don't even know the footprint of it, but like I think we gave a presentation with the OCM team last year at Hyatt Web or Digital Collegium, and then the mantra was like one university, one website. So they were trying to like bring the brand in. So like no matter what site you pulled up, it looked like the University of Tennessee. So that was kind of their main goal is to get everybody looking the same. And how they did that was like with the campus community and that consolidation of like to get this theme, you're going to be hosted on this server that comes with the support from our IT folks, that comes support from the OCM team. You get this documentation, and then you get this theme to accomplish that goal. So
And related to that, we actually have a question in the Q&A about how the schools are structured. Person says, for example, we're a decentralized institution, so many folks have their own IT teams and developers. How has the institutional structure influenced your WordPress strategy, your projects?
I guess I can start with that one again too. I kind of feel both Ed and I are at different universities, and I think our structures are probably on the opposite ends of the spectrum, but I could be wrong. But we are very centralized. We are centralized IT. We are centralized marketing. There is limited to no individual folks hired by the different colleges or divisions. So that does give us the advantage there. It also creates complications. But and also just having a good working relationship with those different departments and divisions across campus that I need to work with on a regular basis. Like I meet with our marketing team twice a week, for an hour. And sometimes those meetings last 10 minutes, sometimes they last a full hour. Sometimes they're completely focused on what we're working on, and sometimes they're focused on just building a good rapport and working relationship so that when we have these big projects, we can quickly get on the same page.
I'm being a little bit quiet about these questions because my context is often so different than some other people in WP Campus where I'm working directly with students. But what I would say about my organization that has some things in common is although I work in a faculty center and I'm supporting students and faculty, um, one of the things that is particular about my situation is I have to clean up all my own messes. That's not always true for every education tech expert. Sometimes there are some people that like have the outreach job and another team that does the cleanup job or handles the tickets or things like that. What I would say about my faculty center is we both are building the tools, we're training on the tools, and when there are problems, we're the ones that then have to fix it. And I think that feedback loop helps me in that we are so centralized in there that like I'm very cautious about not making mistakes because I'm going to be the one that has to clean it up, right? So things like the switch to full site editing for students with students as the audience was really scary for me, but it's going fairly well. Now we've only, built about 100 of those full site editing portfolios with students, but we are trying to scale this at my institution where hopefully someday I have 3,000 students building their sites on WordPress. And we're trying to think about what we can do that scales to that number of editors.
Yeah. Mike, I know that you're not directly at UTK, but I was going to say if you could maybe speak on what UTK wanted for the rollout. You mentioned that it was going to be really big. It was going to be across a lot of people, across a lot of teams. So thinking about what it meant to try and address the needs of everyone. And this could, not to, prompt you, but this could also be a good time to talk about the um uh the storefront page, the block generation
Mike, everybody
that
wants to see the storefront
a
page.
lot of people
Okay.
asked
There's
about.
a lot of people. I have to tell you, we practiced yesterday, and I got so excited about the storefront page that I had to apologize to Mike because I was like, the other parts of your talk are cool too. But like
Yeah,
I was just
yeah.
really love this one
I had
part. So
to I
please
had to
show that
pull
off.
Ed back and be like, we got to talk about more than just
Yeah.
that.
Well, so as I pulled that up, like the team at UTK, like I said, they had those three colleges of pilot programs, and then they planned the rollout is that like there was these they were going to release it to like the main colleges, and then under those colleges, those subgroups would get access to the theme after their main parent was in the theme. So it's a very large structure, but the team itself, the OCM team, and big shout out to them because they have been keeping up this documentation site since we've handed off the project, and they've been I like to say pass the torch. I don't know if that means anything to anyone else, but it's a nice internal pun. But anyway, but yeah, their team is quite small, and but they also, like I said, that community of developers and whatnot is a great asset to them. So um, this is using that theme, and then I guess the kind of the functionality I was talking about is hidden here in this component library, which kind of gives you a selection of different things that are available in the theme. And then as you dig in, you can learn more about the pattern, different accessibility considerations, and then this interactive theme, switcher, which allows you to, kind of change the block around as you want, and then this copy block functionality. And I have another sub-site pulled up. If I just like come in here and paste it, it just pastes that block and paste and place. Sorry. And so that's kind of that's kind of the quick overview of that. And all of the patterns are registered in that way. So, exploring different variations and whatnot. So,
Yeah, I it's still really cool. Um, One of the things we were talking about yesterday is for particularly people who are, I think you mentioned that this was going to be also a way of standardizing things across the campus for people who might be running their own systems or running their own sites to say, come into this big main system. We have lots of functionality and we're making it really easy for you. And one thing that seems really nice about that component library is also, when you're editing within the WordPress UI, it can be stressful to click a thing and then go, oh God, how do I style it? I can't preview it. What am I doing? Versus this, you get to preview it all, set it up. Very nice. It does seem to make it really, really good for introducing a lot of beginners to the new system.
I was struck when Mike shared this yesterday at the theme that I was sensing that was developing between our two kind of little shares, that we were building alternative pathways to do things that are already in core, but we were trying to surface them in a different light or make it easier for our audience because we're the people that we know our audience. We're thinking about what that experience needs to be like at the end, and that was something that, I was showing off kind of like, how do you navigate the full site editor for a brand new beginner for that? And I had those deep links, and it's kind of a parallel path. And Mike's, has this pattern, library, and that you could go through it through the pattern inserter, but like we needed a parallel path that added some different context and added some different tools to it.
Yeah. Kevin, not to put you on the spot, but I'm curious about you. I know that you mentioned that you're working really in depth with the marketing team. You're meeting with them twice a week, and this is your project is quite focused on what they functionality they do and don't need in terms of governance.
Mhm.
Um, I'm curious what it looks like as you all are moving on to full site editor, how you're bringing them into the fold.
I mean, they're as on board with it as we are on the development side. So it's just been a very, you know, it's a collaborative approach for the most part. I mean, we have a good working relationship. We're all kind of like This is just what makes sense for us. We are a medium-sized liberal arts university that, um, has good access to resources, but also limited access to resources at the same time. WordPress is kind of hits that sweet spot perfect for us. So I don't know if I'm really answering your question here, but like there hasn't really needed to be a lot of hard selling going on here.
I
And
think you
that's
are.
been
I
really
was also
nice.
thinking about training. Like how are you helping the marketing team as new changes become available roll out?
There is someone else that is sitting in on this webinar that is much better qualified to answer that question than I am because she is on that side of it. Um, so the way training pretty much happens, like our core marketing team, they are all incredibly competent. It's pretty much like, here's a new feature. If you weren't already aware of it, go check it out, and they're good. And then we actually have one person that is a IT employee that is embedded in marketing, and she puts together all of the training. I believe it is a Canvas course. If anyone is familiar with Canvas, she uses it for that. And eh, I am not the qualified person to answer any deeper into that than what I've just said. So,
That's totally fair.
Can I throw a question at Mike? Just, just Mike, you presented a hybrid theme
Mhm.
here, right? You've got an extensive pattern library. Just so everyone knows that, Ed isn't in the pocket of big full site editing, can you explain to the group why a hybrid theme makes sense for your context?
I've seen the checks, Ed, so you
Yeah,
can't convince
okay.
me otherwise. But like, no, I think it just comes back to your requirements. Like, I think at the time UTK wanted really strict control over the like. If you go into that documentation station into storefront, it's hard to say the other two words, but um, they have a navigation strategy. So they wanted to really lock down that main menu. And so at the time, it made sense for us to, blockumentation. I like it. But
Yeah.
like it made sense that for us to use that classic menu interface in order to, allow like only one level of sub menu kind of thing, so I guess it just depends on like what your requirements are and if the tools are available in FSC or WordPress at that point to accomplish those goals. Like the human made folks, like I like to stay really close to core in my development and like make really understand like what you're getting into when you go custom and based on those requirements and making that a real decision that like when we were working with that team is that like well we can do this is how we propose it and this is going to be your decision to live with because you're going to inherit the code base after that so
Mhm.
Would it be fair to say this is something that we've reflected on is like WordPress has moved so quickly over the last 5 to 8 years that a lot of times the decision you make is based on the date that you're making that decision. And like, we our current website, like if we had started the project 6 months, like it's a classic theme. If it was 6 months later, we probably would have done a hybrid theme, but it wasn't quite there, quite ready yet. And I think that is starting to stabilize out. And I think because I mean, at this point, I think that full site editing, the block editor, Gutenberg, whatever term you want to use, has kind of matured enough and stabilized enough that we can start making enterprise-based decisions on that. And like, I don't, 18 months ago, I don't know. That was just when I was barely getting ready to like commit full throttle. And it took a little bit while even on top of that to like get involved. And by the time we really got involved with the project, because again, small team, it's amazing how quickly you can get diverted from one project to another project. And by the time we came back to this one, it was like, yeah, this is the right decision for us.
Kevin, you just said you wouldn't have made that choice 18 months ago. What was the turning point for you? Was there something specific that you can think of, or was it just a general feeling of momentum?
It was A little, yes, but I think if nothing else, just me getting comfortable enough with it, having read enough documentation, having worked on enough smaller projects to prepare to be able to give it a definitive answer when these questions about can we do this? Can we not allow people to do that? Being able to answer enough of those questions definitively, and then having enough of a feel to be able to answer that small percentage of the you can't with I'm not positive, but we'll figure it out, you know. So yeah. A little bit of intuitive, a little bit of hard facts, and a lot of just having worked with the system and the options and all of that on smaller, not as critical projects.
I think part of that decision too is, at least it was for us at UTK, is that or the folks at UTK, I should say, they what's great about the WordPress project is that you don't have to do everything. Like
Yeah.
all of that development energy, if you embrace that, like you are going to take, or you can take advantage of that, and WordPress just gets better because of the open source project itself. So I think that has to do, I think that has to weigh in on some of this decision making process. Like, yeah, we can go off and do it over here in this way, but if we really truly embrace WordPress, like we don't have like hundreds of developers, at any given college. So like, what is your developer time at your institution like best spent towards those efforts? So
That makes me think of what Joeleen was saying earlier and also during one of the planning sessions, but about what is a super high priority for development? What do we need to have yesterday versus what can we fudge or wait on because WordPress has been adopting more and more popular features into core. So Carrie mentioned in the chat that um, her institution had a lot of custom accordion blocks because everybody loves an accordion block. But WordPress has added a core accordion block. And unfortunately, Carrie, it sounds like people are recommending regex as the way to migrate over. But uh, that
yeah,
sense of
go ahead, Patty.
just if you are willing to wait a little bit, WordPress might do it for you.
That sounds like so much of the conversations that we've had with the internal team over the several years. Is I was, you know, of course I like keep track of the release notes and whatever, but like a lot of the decisions coming through is like, if you wait like maybe 3 months, like we'll have a better answer for this, or is this is coming kind of thing. Like that became my mantra, is like, oh, this is coming because like, I've seen the GitHub activity or whatever. So yeah, I mean it helps to the developer blog, like there's an article that comes out like every month, like what's new for devs in WordPress is a great resource to put, like if you read one thing from the developer blog, it should be that blog post. It keeps you so informed with like what the project's doing, and it's a whoever puts that together, great shout out for that. So
Actually, the custom work that I did to take the blocks out of certain views was a post done by Nick Diego, who also got call outs in the chat today. I think people were looking at his group block that
Mhm.
stretches the links from inside to the rest of the group block. And one of the things that he kind of stressed to me when we met in New Orleans a couple years ago, when he visited WP Campus, and did a workshop or two, was looking for plugins that extended core blocks instead of replacing core blocks. And so, that block that was shared there isn't a replacement for the group block. It doesn't replace core group block functionality. It extends the core block. And there's another one that he suggested to me that I use all the time now on my sites, advanced query loop, that doesn't replace the query loop. It's building on the core query loop with just a few modifications, trying to make sure that like the things that I do add, we do future proof, because I I have people that ask me and like friends that say like, "Oh, I got this WordPress site. Can you help me out?" And it's like, "Oh, but what you need is a migration from Beaver Builder. What you need is a migration from, whatever page builder was the right choice for you back in 2017 when you set up your site, and there wasn't a robust and full block editor that you could do the type of full site editing that we're doing now. And it's such a harder job to do that migration."
Yeah. I Migrating from custom builders is so difficult. We are actually at time, so I have to cut us off here.
Actually, I'm going to
Thank
say
you.
one more thing, Pilot. I'm going to interrupt you.
All
This is
right.
Pilot's first event running as our director of events. And I just want to thank them for all the work that they put into running this. We made the tough decision to cancel our face-to-face conference and switch to the online summits. But it's still a ton of work to do these online summits. And I want to thank both Pilot and the rest of the team that contributed to this. Kevin was there on the events team's calls. Charles Fulton was there on the events team's calls. And I want to thank everyone who contributed to making these events for the time they put into it because it's a lot. And I want everybody, whether you love this event or hate this event, I still encourage you to volunteer. If you like what we're doing, volunteer so we can do more of it. If you hate what we're doing and you have different directions you think we should be going, volunteer and we'll do that too. Because we do want to be responsive to that community. Because we want to keep doing more events. And it was a question. We are committed. We do want to get back to the face-to-face conference, and we've set a goal for ourselves of doing that in the summer of 2027. It's not going to be this summer, but we do want to get back to that in-person conference. And if that is the experience that you want to have, we would take volunteers for that too, of how do we build this in long term over months. So thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all. Wow. It's also just good to see everyone in the chat who had a good time. I'm really glad uh, about how well this turned out. Um, Thank you to the volunteers on our events team. Thank you to our volunteer presenters, and thank you to everyone who attended. We covered this at the beginning, but today's webinar was recorded. It'll be posted on our website, and I've also been collecting some of the resource links that our presenters have been sharing throughout. If you want to stick around, we're hosting the WPCampus After Hours session until 1 p.m. Taylor Jaden will also be hosting a WordPress trivia session, and we'll have some time for open discussion just on everything that we've talked about today. That'll be in a regular Zoom meeting because webinars don't really work that way. The Zoom invitation is in the chat. Taylor posted it earlier, and Ed has just, people are posting it left and right. You'll see it. You can't miss it. While I have you here, I also want to give a quick reminder that our next summit, WordPress in Education, What We Teach When We Teach WordPress, will be taking place on Tuesday, March 24th at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. It'll be free for all to register. It'll be a virtual event just like this one, and it'll feature representatives from the WordPress education team talking about the role that WordPress can play in digital learning environments for students. So more details will be coming soon, so mark your calendar, but registration is open now, and I will put the link in the chat. Thank you all for coming. If you have
Let's go play
ideas
trivia.
for, come play trivia. If you have ideas for future events, if you want to volunteer, if you want us to totally change our direction, you should volunteer for that too. It was great to see you all. Here's the registration for the summit, and I'll see you guys in the other Zoom. Bye-bye.